So for
We're
those
all
of
good.
you, yeah, for those of you who just joined, our apologies in starting late. Literally, when I was about to let you all into the room, I had a power bump and it kicked me off the internet. So, um, so you have missed nothing, and our sincere apologies again. It is about 7 after 12 here in Colorado. Once again, had a power bump right before I let everybody into the room, and it took almost 10 minutes for my internet to restart. So my name is Christine Krieger, and I am the professional development consultant for the Colorado State Library. And I am delighted to have everybody with us today for Reading Video Games as Literature. Shane Taylor is our presenter today, and he is from the Summit County Library. So Shane, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. As Christine said, I'm a teen programming librarian with Summit County Libraries in Breckenridge, Colorado. And I do all the teen programming, and I also organize a video game club for adults, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But I want to start with talking about story at large, because story has been changing for years, for as long as we have had stories to tell. It sort of began with an oral tradition where people would tell stories from hunting trips and to the rest of their tribe or group. And what we would describe that is having an audio component and a narrative component. As technology progressed, the way that we tell stories ultimately changed as well, with being able to write things down on tablets and eventually books that sort of created a story that only had a narrative element. And in much more recent times, things have evolved to include much more technology and many more components to the way that we tell our stories, with silent films adding a visual component, the quote unquote talkies adding the audio component to create an audio visual narrative. And most recently, in the last several decades, we have really taken off with video games adding an interactive component, which we would describe as audio visual Ludo narrative. Ludo, that stem comes from the Latin verb ludere, and the English word ludic, ultimately just meaning to play. And before we get into talking about how I look at video games, because that is ultimately what I'm trying to convey with this presentation, is how I use my background in literature and my passion and just sort of lifetime involvement of video games. Like, I grew up playing video games as a way to let off steam, and ultimately, as I became older, it became my favorite form of receiving story. It provided me opportunities to advance, my own knowledge of critical thinking, and it's given me a lot of opportunities to stay connected with people that are very important in my life. And so using video games as an academic tool to learn more about the human condition is something that I have become really passionate about, because it combines two very important things that I've experienced in my life. And so I want to break down that term of audio-visual ludonarrativity into what I see in video games based on each of those components. And we're going to start with audio, the furthest away from the storytelling component. And this is something, audio and visual, that we do almost on a daily basis when we are taking in podcasts or television and film. We've learned to do this fairly well in recent years. Something pretty obvious, I think everyone will notice first off when you load into a video game is the music. Often that comes in before any visuals, and it sets the tone for the experience that you're about to have. And once you set out on that experience, and There are other sounds, just like any other animated cartoon or film. Every sound is generated by a person on a sound stage, essentially. So I try to think about how realistic are these added sounds of the footsteps, the combat noises. Does the sword you're swinging sound like it should? Does it sound like metal, or does it sound like some sort of cheap replica? And the ambient sounds of a river flowing by you or rock tumbling off of a cliff face, how much does that lend to your immersion and the sort of the verisimilitude of the world that you are now inhabiting? Something that is a little bit more unique to video games themselves, that a lot of people probably are unfamiliar with, are oral cues. These are sounds that happen in response to the player taking an action. Things like, for example, when you play a Mario game and you collect a coin, there's a very unique sound that they have used in every single Mario game since its inception. If you close your eyes and envision Mario collecting a coin, very likely, I'm going to assume you can hear the sound of that action. And that sound is pleasing. It provides the player a way to feel accomplished, that they're doing the correct thing. This is a tool that game designers use to guide and encourage players to collect or go in certain directions. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more with our visual component. When we're thinking about the visuals of a video game, there's exactly what you'd expect. There's the art direction, the animation style, the choice to use specific colors. Unique to video games as a media is that they include a head-up display, or a HUD, as is referred to in short. The HUD is a tool that comes from a usage in fighter jets, so that a pilot can see where they're piloting their jet, is that they also have pertinent information on the peripherals of where they are looking. This includes things like targeting, weapon sensors, the firing status, ammo, how much ammo you may have, information that you need to be successful in order to accomplish the task. In a video game, this is going to include stuff like a health bar, how much ammo you have left, a race course if you are playing a racing game. And the term HUD stands for head up and eyes out, which is something that it literally does. It helps you to focus on the task at hand while understanding everything else that you need to manage while you are accomplishing these tasks. Once you're going deeper into the screen and you can understand the sort of landscape of the game, this is very important, because the land that you explore is procedurally generated by the designers. They have given you a space that they intend for you to explore. They intend for you to be immersed in this place. How easy is it for you to move through this? Are you using a vehicle? Are you walking? What are the rules of gravity here? All of that helps to tell the story of this world without using any words, and is, in my opinion, very important to sort of digest. It happens very subconsciously, but I try to bring it to the forefront when I am first experiencing a game. And once I have a better understanding of the space and what I'm allowed to do, what I'm encouraged to explore, I start to try to notice the specific colors and the lighting in this space, because video games typically use a very specific color palette. I'm thinking in particular a very, big name in the media right now with The Last of Us. In the video game, there is very muted colors. There are a lot of dark grays, a lot of browns, and just sort of muted tones. When you look around the space in the landscape of the game itself, there are bright colors, particularly yellow and orange, that are used exclusively on the passage forward in the direction of progression. Designers are using these colors, or maybe an extra spotlight that is brighter than the ambient lighting in the space, to catch the eye of the player and draw them in that direction. Typically, if you see something that's colored or lighted out of what is typical of what you've been seeing, the designers are encouraging you to go over there, either to find a secret, a key item, or just the path forward. When this is done really well, the player typically would not notice that they're being guided in a certain direction. The same with oral cues. If they're done well, the player won't realize that they're being rewarded with a sound in the same way that we are not being realized that we're being guided in a certain direction. Those two elements that are unique to video games work hand in hand in pushing the story forward, encouraging the player to find the necessary items to progress. And here I have an example of a very basic HUD from Mario Kart, a game that is very familiar to most people. You could see on the right that there is a sort of translucent racetrack showing the positioning of Mario within the rankings and how close other racers are. Below that, you could see the actual placing of the racer. Bottom left, you could see how many coins they have collected, how many laps they have completed and have left. And up top left, you can see an item ready to be used against other racers. This is all pertinent information to playing the Mario Kart, but they're not getting in the way of you being able to navigate the race course or the level that you are being provided by the designer, which brings us to the Ludo part of the term, or the gameplay and level design. I break these two things into distinct parts. Gameplay being what the player can do, what the player can manipulate and change how their avatar moves through the world. And that is paired right next to what the player is supposed to do. How can the player manipulate the variables that they are provided to become creative in the task that they have been asked to complete? That task being the level design. The level design is the space in which the player must accomplish their quest. These are the constants that we have to deal with as players, and where a lot of the difficulty comes from. Are we trying to solve puzzles? Are we fighting an onslaught of zombies? Are we just trying to explore and find enough resources in order to build a staircase or another useful material to, again, progress through the story and the plot? There's a lot of creativity that happens here, and where a lot of game designers put most of their effort until very recently, where we start getting into narrative elements. And this right here is an example of how a player can manipulate the gameplay that they are working with. Here is another example from Mario Kart. We have Yoshi as our avatar, but we have 3 different wheels of options for our vehicle, for our tires, and for a sort of paragliding parachute. Each of these things, the player gets to choose anything that is available. This is going to change how Yoshi and the player navigate the race course, with each vehicle handling different, each tire having different traction, and each glider having a different weight to it. And so this is where the player can get creative and start to strategize within the confines, the boundaries of a specific racetrack and the rules of the world that that we have been given in Mario Kart. All of these things I try to weigh differently the closer that they get to the narrative element. Audio, for me, is something that initially sets the tone and the energy of the space. The visuals help to ground you in the world that the designers are presenting to you. The gameplay provides an immersion element and a little bit more verisimilitude if it's done correctly. And as we get closer to the narrative, I weigh each element more heavily, where audio is pretty minor, visuals help a lot. The gameplay and the narrative are what really are at odds in most games, and we're going to get into that after we take a look at the different ways that story can be given to a player. The first thing I try to notice is, who is the narrator? Is there one at all, and what their perspective is? When video games very often don't have a narrator, and when there is one, that is a thing to notice, because that tells me that this game is going to push me in a specific direction. There is a story that they are trying to be told, in comparison to a world where you are given space to explore and find the story on your own and put the pieces together and discover as you would more in true life. The next I try to notice is how much other characters, the non-playable characters, talk to me or talk to each other. And to what purpose are they talking? Are they there to provide a sense of realism in the market that you're walking through, or are they there to help accentuate the story or provide understanding of how the day-to-day person is being affected by something larger? Try to notice that, because if the characters are just there to barter with the merchants, very likely you're just going to ignore those people, and they might not as well have been there. But if they're there interacting and reacting with you and what is happening in the world, that's going to really bring the character, the player into the game significantly more. Next, something that is unusual and unique to video games is the description of items. Almost every video game, you're going to be picking up a lot of stuff. For years, you'd pick up in your explorations as a player a sword, and it would tell you, this is an iron greatsword. It does 100 damage per swing. Over time, designers have included more and more information when you open up your menu and look at the items that you pick up. Now, if you were to pick up at the same sword, the description might say, this is Beatrice, and she was wielded by the most powerful knight of the Third Age. And subsequent information about the story of this sword and why it is important and why it included in this location in the game or within the story. The designers have taken this unique opportunity to give the player deep information about the world that is not necessary, but it brings the space more life, and it helps the game breathe more. So I encourage anyone who's playing a game, always open your menu, look at those items, and learn about the story and how they fit into the lore. The last thing I'm trying to really notice when it comes to story in games is how much player agency is there. Is the narrator railroading me in a specific direction? Am I not allowed to go backward in the world to somewhere I've been before? That really affects, at least for me, how I see and appreciate the artistry that the designers have given to me. In contrast, the designers can go a completely opposite direction and provide choices for the player. These can be as big or as small as choosing to go into the forest before going to the city. It could be as big as providing an open world with dialogue options when you talk to various non-player characters that alter the course of how the characters interact, or even how the central conflict is being addressed. This helps me to understand the flow of the game. What kind of pacing do they want? Is it all right for me to linger, or was it the designer's intent for me to plow through the story from plot point to plot point to plot point? All of these things working together create what's called a ludic frame. And you're seeing right now 2 different screenshots from 2 different games for me to exemplify what that means. On the left, we have a screen that I believe most people have seen before. This is from Super Mario, where after Mario has traveled through this entire world to the castle to rescue his princess, we find out, oh no, the princess is in another castle. In terms of the ludic frame, I have slogged through as the player, encounter after encounter and challenge after challenge, only to be told all of that was not really worth anything. It may have been enjoyable, but this frame right here down keys the activity that I just did. It puts less emphasis on it, and it makes the narrative of the story a little bit less powerful, and the player want to care about it a little bit less. On the right, this frame comes from a game called Portal, released by Valve. In this game, the player inhabits a human test subject that is navigating essentially a series of mazes. And as a reward for completing those mazes, you are promised cake. As you explore more and more through this test facility, you see evidence of previous testees with handprints on the wall, and at this point, you're seeing literal writing on the wall, where we've been promised cake this entire time that we've been going through these test chambers. It's sort of light and inconsequential for the most part, until we get to here where we see scrawling on the wall that reads, "The cake is a lie." And you see this over and over and over repeated in a increasingly more messy scrawl. This frame right here, taking into account what we've been told, the tone of the space, and the sort of lighthearted, inconsequential nature of the activities, this writing upkeys this whole activity, because it does put a consequence on it. It tells us that our tester, who is promising us something, is not exactly who they are, or maybe just what they're saying. So put into context all of the different things that you've been experiencing, and ask yourself, is this raising the stakes for what I'm doing, or is it lowering? This lends itself into trying to understand whether or not this game that we're playing has ludonarrative harmony or ludonarrative dissonance. This term was coined by a game designer named Clint Hocking, who most notably worked for the companies Ubisoft and Valve. His most popular games are Splinter Cell, Far Cry 2, and most recently Watch Dogs Legion. To describe what a game that has harmony is one that has its audio, video, and ludic components working together to tell a story that can only, or in the best scenario, best be told as a game. In terms of what dissonance, a game with dissonance, it has some elements or all elements working against each other. They're in direct opposition. They maybe slightly don't align with the story that you are being told. To exemplify what this harmony and dissonance kind of mean, I'm going to go through two different games, and one that has dissonance and one that has harmony. And we're going to start with BioShock, that was released by the company 2K in 2007. BioShock at its heart is a critique on Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism that she exhibits in her novel Atlas Shrugged. Objectivism is the idea that one should follow their own self-interest and profit from their own abilities and ambitions while being virtually uninhibited by others. Essentially, libertarianism. And in this game, we go and explore what it looks like for objectivism to be the law of the land and how the society crumbles underneath it. In the game, Jack, or the player, crash lands from an airplane into the ocean by a lighthouse, and your only option here is to swim to the lighthouse for safety. Once inside, the lighthouse reveals itself to be the entrance to the underwater city of Rapture. Rapture is governed by a man named Andrew Ryan and Ayn Rand's objectivist ideals. Upon entering the lighthouse, this is the first view that you are given. A bust of Andrew Ryan himself holding a large banner that says "No gods or kings, only man." This is your first hint, 5 minutes into the game, that in this world, no one is going to tell you what to do. There is nothing that rules your decision making. It is only up to you. And because of that, BioShock is a commentary on the relationship between freedom and power through this Randian objectivist lens. And Clint Hocking wrote a now infamous blog post right about 2 months after the release of BioShock, critiquing its dissonance between the narrative and its ludic elements. In that blog post, he says, "The leveraging of the game's narrative structure against its ludic structure all but destroys the player's ability to feel connected to either, forcing the player to either abandon the game in protest, which he almost did, or simply accept that the game cannot be enjoyed as both a game and a story, and to then finish it for the mere sake of finishing it." And if you're interested in the full article, there's a link to it right there. In this game, as Jack, you enter the city and you find a radio and try to make correspondence with someone. Around you, you see a dilapidated and crumbling metropolis. On the other side of the radio, a man named Atlas responds to you and tells you that he needs help. He asks you, "Would you kindly help to rescue my wife and daughter from the dystopian horrors that are happening in this underwater city?" Really, you have no choice there. You have to go help him because there's no other path for the player to take. This immediately goes into opposition with what we saw before, being welcomed by a banner that quite literally says, do whatever you want. But we're going to go along. We're a moral player. We want to help him out. This is already going into the this is already in a, oh man, going against the ideals that the game is trying to portray. Maybe 15, 20 minutes later, we are presented with our first real choice and a contract, because we've come to understand that Andrew Ryan wants us to act out of our own self-interest, and Atlas wants us to be more moral. We encounter in this space that freedom and seeking power has led to ultimate corruption in science, where scientists in this world have discovered this new form of energy called Adam, and they have genetically engineered orphan children to wander the city, collecting Adam from people who have overdosed or who have ingested too much of this substance, because this substance is something that provides physical power. And so these orphan children are wandering around the city, collecting this powerful energy. And when we find one, we are implored by Atlas to rescue them, extract the Adam that is corrupting these little sisters, is what they're called. Or we are given the option to follow the Randian choice by harvesting them, ultimately killing them, taking out all of the Adam that they've been collecting, and leaving them with no life-giving energy. Here, this is a moral choice to where, am I going to be moral or am I going to be selfish? In the moment, you do receive more of this Adam as a quote-unquote currency for the game, but if you rescue them, you get less. So that choice right there is accentuating making a choice in self-interest is going to benefit you in this world. Rescuing and acting moral will not. However, a little bit further than halfway through the game, if you follow the moral choice, all of the little sisters that you have rescued will provide you a gift of a large amount of Adam. And this gift balances out the differences between choosing to harvest and choosing to rescue, ultimately nullifying this moral contract that you're forced to sign, taking away the agency, taking away the objectivist element of the gameplay. And so we're being, narratively, we're being told something, and then mechanically, we are being told that it doesn't, that story doesn't really matter that much. This choice is really meant to accentuate the difference between objectivism and moral choices. But through playing the game and in the climax, we realized that Atlas himself was the one to create Adam and create this sort of horrific world. And Andrew Ryan was just sort of taking advantage in his own objectivist way of Atlas's objectivist pursuit of power. And we realized through our relationship with Atlas that every time he asks us to help him out, he begins the phrase with "would you kindly," and understanding he has genetically engineered these young girls to collect power, a physical power, and he has also genetically engineered Jack, the player, to respond positively, to always say yes and do the task if it is followed by a "would you kindly." So ultimately we were told you had no choice all along, like joke's on you, which is the ultimate ludic, this right here is the ultimate ludic frame that devalues and down keys everything that the player has been working toward in the entire game. In contrast, I want to talk about this Hades that was developed by Supergiant Games, an independent game company, and released in 2018. This game, in my opinion, has the most harmony between its ludic elements and narrative elements that I have ever seen. And to give you background, Hades is a retelling of the myth of the taking of Persephone from the perspective of their son, Zagreus. And the player is inhabiting Zagreus through this entire narrative. Zagreus has never known his mother because this game takes place after Hades has escaped, or excuse me, Persephone has escaped Hades, but in this fiction, she does not return. And so Zagreus sets out to escape the underworld in search of his mother. On that journey through the several layers of Hades, we meet and are given boons and advice from the entire pantheon, demigods, furies, various heroes from Greek myth. And everyone who meets Zagreus wants to help him out, talks to him, and what's most interesting about the writing of this game is that each non-player character directly responds to what the player has just done. And in addition to that, to make it a little bit more of a full world, the sound design is impeccable. The soundtrack, the score is the full spectrum of various genres of rock, from like power ballads to heavy metal, which really sort of complements the space that you're inhabiting. But the space and the way that the Supergiant has decided to color it and design it is extremely bright and peppy. And so and it brings a contrast that even though it is intense and scary of an experience, the world that they're trying to create is still playful, and you can find joy and joy in it. And when you meet, here's an example of meeting one of the gods, Zeus, where he is just asking you if you need help, do you want help? And all of these moments are fully voice acted. And something that is incredibly smart about this game is the fact that all of the characters respond to exactly what you've just been doing. This character, Hypnos, who's the incarnation of sleep, greets you every time you die and are returned to the house of Hades. He acknowledges that you were unsuccessful in your journey, but what's cool about him is that he talks to you, he knows what killed you or this space that you were killed in, and he gives you advice on how to deal with that enemy or that encounter in the future. And I played this game for a little over 50 hours in total, and in that entire time, I have never seen a line of dialogue repeated. The audio really just sets the tone for being in the underworld. The visuals set the tone for what kind of people and the level of seriousness that the designers are going for, and it also grounds me into this fantasy world. The gameplay is pretty straightforward for a video game. They're not trying to do anything particularly extravagant with that, but what really pulls me into that relatively typical gameplay is this really intelligent writing, where we learn about Orpheus and Eurydice and Achilles and Patroclus, and they feel like true living people, and the world itself feels so alive. And because all of that coming together and creating such a strong product, Hades in 2021 was recognized by the Hugo Awards to have excellence in science fiction and fantasy writing. And this is the first and only video game that has ever won an award in literature, which I think shows us how closely video game designers are getting to these sort of robust stories that are really important to take a look at, because Hades really helps to illustrate family dynamics, and beyond just learning about Greek mythology, they do make a statement about the dysfunctionality of being part of a family. And I think you learn something about the human condition through playing it. Yes, you may.
Through. This is from Joshua, and he says this might be too big of a question, but what do you consider to be the difference between intentional contrast, the humor, the bright colors, versus the dark setting of Hades, and dissonance like you discussed with BioShock?
I think what's really important in Hades is that that contrast between the brightness of the illustration and the darkness of the music is lifted up by the writing of the characters and the overall tone of how those characters interact with each other. Because there are incredibly serious, like Hades himself is particularly gruff and basically just created as a grumpy dad. And then there are other, like the Gorgons are illustrated as sort of bubbly floating heads that are, just misunderstood. And they have quite a few jokes. The mixture of tone transcends just the audio and visual elements, but is really fleshed out in the writing elements. Whereas with BioShock, those two things, the writing and it's more the gameplay mechanics of BioShock that are in conflict with each other, to where the gameplay stands on its own and is not necessarily supported by the narrative. That's my take on it. Are we good on that? Cool. Moving forward, now that you have a sort of basic understanding of how I look at video games and how I try to break them apart, I am encouraging other people to engage in a more critical analysis of games by hosting a video game club for adults at my library. And I want to talk to you about how exactly I run that. So we meet once a month at a local brewery. To pick a game, I will present a theme for the month, and I email that theme out 1 week before our meeting. For example, we played games that were Japanese role-playing games. We've done horror a couple months. We have, for Women's History Month, we played female protagonists-led games. In June, we followed the summer reading program. Like last year, we our theme was Oceans of Possibility. And we choose a game that fits within that. I encourage all of my members to pitch games for us all to play. Because I want to create a space where everyone has some input, and the main goal of my members when they join, most people have told me that they want to explore other genres. They are feeling like they're stuck in a rut playing the same game for years. or only playing the same type of game and wanting to, sort of test the waters in other genres. We take a vote on it, just a simple hand vote to decide our game of the month. And then we leave the brewery and go home and play it individually, the same that you would read a book on your own for a book club. However, there's a little bit more going on in the middle of the month rather than just taking in story. We are solving puzzles and we are working toward solving some sort of large conflict. And so I've set up a Discord server, which is essentially just a giant chat room for my members to join and ask questions, get hints without Googling and getting a spoiler or something like that. And we also have a separate channel where we just sort of stay connected and give personal updates. And because of that Discord, members are more encouraged to, take a vacation. It's okay if you miss a meeting. You can still provide your input and your thoughts for everyone online. And because of that, I have more members that are virtual that just throw in a couple sentences, there's some 2 cents here and there. And so even though I'm not necessarily meeting with the 40 people that are in my Discord every month, I'm still getting some input and feedback from a good chunk of them. And here's a little example of what that looks like. You could see if you pause this or come back to it later, you could see that I am posted, I'm having trouble with a certain area. And one of my members jumps in with several things to say about advice. And if you need a break, you can go to this other area and get some new skills, get some new get some more currency to assist with this part that is proving difficult for you right now. And once we play the game, once we talk about it a little bit online, we meet back up at the end of the month and we meet for about 2 hours. Our first 30 minutes we use to sort of catch up with each other. We talk about other games that we've been playing that are not the club game. And we talk about video game news quite a bit, where someone will bring up a game that is in development and they're super excited about, or someone got invited to be a beta tester before the game was released to provide feedback, gameplay feedback to the designers. At the end of the calendar year in December, we always talk about the Game Awards and what our personal game of the year is and what we think, which games that are nominated deserve the title of whichever award that they're up for. Once we get past the sort of pleasantries, I take about an hour to discuss our game of the month in a book club fashion. I will prepare a handful of questions about important scenes, ask people about how the gameplay worked for them and their brain, and if anyone did anything particularly unique to overcome a task. Those are very general, but similar to a book club, it's hard to have the same question for every single title. So we'll go through that. And toward the end, I take about 15 minutes to do what my club calls teacher time. When over the course of the month, I look up designer interviews and various articles about the game that we're playing and the design and development process. So I will share all of those things that I've learned, and as much as I can, I try to bring in a small, like 5-10 minute sort of just presentation, or try not to use the word lecture, but I will help to illustrate design theory or narrative structure. For example, when we played a Japanese role-playing game, there was a lot of disconnect between the player and the game because Eastern storytelling is vastly different from Western. And so we took a moment to explain the difference between Freytag's pyramid and Keisha Tenketsa and the different cultural values that a Japanese game designer would take versus an American designer. My goal in bringing these things in is to help my members see the game that they just played from a new perspective and encourage them to look for that other perspective on their own when they're playing games independently. And then last, we'll take 10 to 15 minutes to pitch any games that we want to play for the next month, and we'll take a vote, say goodbye, and do it all again. A little bit of the science behind the scenes stuff that I alluded to. I read reviews, critiques, and interviews to gather knowledge myself in the email that I send out as a reminder and a call for game suggestions for the next month's theme. I also attach those online articles that I've been reading, and so that my members can, if they choose, read up and get the same background knowledge that I have, so they understand better why I am talking about the game the way that I do. This includes screenshots from the game or games that are inspiration for what we've been playing, comparative images between, I'm thinking specifically between, my Eastern and Western values conversation. I brought in a print of the Mona Lisa and a print of, I forget what it's called, Along the River During the Qingming Festival, which are valued the same in the two different cultures, but the Mona Lisa focuses on a single woman and the landscape is a background. And in contrast, the Qingming Festival painting is a landscape where people are very hard to distinguish. In addition to all of these sort of discussion aids, over the course of the month, I gather fiction and nonfiction books or movies from the library collection that I make available for checkout for my members. And if they do want to take something home, I will just do like a manual checkout. And for example, like this month, we're playing a game called This War of Mine, which sort of chronicles the lives of civilians in a city that is under siege in wartime. And it takes direct influence from the sort of desecration of Warsaw during World War II, and the art style is credited to be grown from the style of Banksy. And so I have like a Banksy book. I have the book with like personal testimonies from people who survived the siege of Leningrad, so that if my members want to deep dive and understand why the game took the form that it did, they have the opportunity to find resources, or I'm providing them resources, excuse me. They have the opportunity to go into the sources, similar sources that the designers did to create this piece of art. To give you some more examples of the things that we do talk about, first was Octopath Traveler for our Japanese role-playing game month. I already explained the Eastern and Western comparison. When we had a horror game, we played Bendy and the Ink Machine, which is an allegorical retelling of Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks' professional relationships, specifically how Ub Iwerks designed and drew Mickey Mouse first, and Walt Disney took credit for all of that, and Ub Iwerks has essentially been lost. In that game, you play through the fictional perspective of Ub Iwerks returning to the animation studio. For female protagonists month, we played a game called Celeste, which follows a young girl just climbing to the summit of Mount Celeste just to say that she did it because she wanted to accomplish something. And through this climbing the mountain, we realized that it's actually an allegory of her overcoming her own anxiety and depression. And coded within that, in between levels, there is a screen where you see Madeline, the player character, celebrating and moving forward to the next portion of her climb. And the background is colored the exact pigments of the trans pride flag. And there's little codes and hints throughout the game to hint that Madeline is a trans woman until you get to the very end in the final sequence where you see her back at home, relaxing, talking to the friends that she's made along the way, and she has a trans flag on her desk. And so we had a really good conversation about the importance of representation of both the mental health and LGBTQ issues in games, and how, at least for me as a gay man and a member of the LGBTQ community, I felt extremely seen. Even though it wasn't showing me my identity, it showed me that these identities are allowed in this space, which is important for everyone. And last note on Celeste, the game designer is also a trans woman named Maddie. And so they came out in it online as saying that this game was a chronicle of their journey, while not entirely autobiographical, but more of a memoir piece where there's creative liberties taken. Last one game that I want to bring up is a game called Spiritfarer, which we played for Oceans of Possibilities. In this, you play as a young woman named Stella, who takes over the role of Charon the ferryman, and you sail around the ocean to various islands, collecting and meeting spirits and bringing them aboard your ship. And you are meant to help them sort of find peace with their mortal life and be able to move on into whatever is next. And this really helped a lot of people understand loss in their own lives in many forms, in terms of relationship breakups, in terms of losing family members. And we really came together around this game and praised its ability to really discuss and encourage discussion about a topic that is so sensitive for everyone. And while I've had a lot of success with this club, I think it's really important to notice what didn't work out very well. In the process of getting this program approved, I had to have conversations about stigma about video games, that we're not just playing them. We are seeing them as pieces of art, and they are valuable as pieces of art. They have something to say, and they do teach us about the human condition. And I hope that I've scratched the surface on how they do that. And to help with that, I want to encourage you, we have to research everything. I researched, are there any other clubs like this around? Are there enough materials for me to achieve what I want out of creating this club, and present my findings in my program proposal, so that my managers and director can understand that we're not just going to play video games, we are doing this very intentionally. A second thing that was a big tough spot for me was working with financial accessibility, because I asked my members to buy the games themselves. And it's something that is hard for some people. Most people that play video games or are interested in being a part of this club already have a means to play the games. They already have a console or a computer in which they can access games. But making sure that those games that we do play are easily paid for is hard. I always take advantage of sales. I research the games that I might be suggesting to the club and make sure that they are at least under $30. And to help do that, I always look to independent developer games because number one, they're cheaper, but number two, very often they have a lot more heart in them, and they take a lot more care to tell the stories of marginalized groups or just unique stories in general. And I try to do way too much with this club to be, in the beginning, I sent out paragraph-long emails about things that I'm learned about and want to talk about. I tried to ask my club to fill out like these worksheets with creating a review, asking them to write down their thoughts on the various different elements of games, and that just didn't work. Sometimes we just need a safe space to go and enjoy the things that we enjoy, and that's where I found the most success, is encouraging people to think more critically, but also providing them a space to relax into their nerdiness, for lack of a better word, for them to relate to someone else and just totally tangent on something that is unique to our community. And so I compromised with my reviews. Instead, now I print out a logo of the game, and I give them a choice to put on a sticker that is, I thought it was a critical hit or I thought it was a critical miss. And that has been a really good compromise. But you can still use those worksheets in the library for more passive kind of things. Like if you already have a collection of video games available for checkout, maybe just provide some worksheets next to it, next to your collection, as a form of providing like a guest pick card. Maybe they check out a video game, or they want to recommend a video game, and encourage them to explain why. This can be a passive program with next to your collection. This could be an active program with anyone, with juniors or teens. Have them create a book of reviews. Gather some juniors or teens and ask them to write a critique of their favorite video game and work on skills, those critical analysis skills there. You could do a literature circle the same way that I do. You could encourage children or adults to write how-to guides. This is very important. This is a really important skill, especially for juniors, to explain procedurally how things are accomplished and how to communicate efficiently. And you could even make displays or checkout bundles, kind of like a binge bag, with a single game and maybe a movie and a book, the same way that I bring my extra materials to my meetings. There's so much that you can do with video games that emphasize other skills rather than just playing games. And maybe you even do want to have a play session. Maybe you have a Minecraft club where you invite a whole bunch of kids, and we're going to build a base together on this island and learn about design and structure, or we're going to work on this some other large project together through this. Video games don't have to just be sitting at a screen. They can be learning tools for so many other types of literacy and life skills. And so I just really hope that you take that away with you. And thank you for listening to me nerd out about video games. And here's a little picture of our club that we took at our 1-year anniversary little party at the brewery that we meet up at. So thank you.
Well, and I want to say a huge thank you to Shane for all of this fabulous information and that that club sounds amazing. I've learned a lot today, and for not freaking out when Christine disappeared at the beginning of the session and my internet
It
went
was
out.
internalized.
And I appreciate all of the attendees also sticking with us. I know we have gone over the top of the hour. It's about 12 after 1. Shane, are you available for questions? Or I don't know if you need to
I am
run to the
available.
desk. We're open to, if you have questions that you want to put in chat, or if there are any lingering questions that you have, we're happy to take them here. Obviously, we also understand if you have to run. I will keep the recording going until I sign off. So if you have to run and other people have questions, we can do that as well. So yeah, post questions in chat if you have them, and I'll wait just another minute or two to see what people might be saying. Somebody said, hope the cake in that picture wasn't a lie because it looks amazing.
It was not a lie, and that I made that cake to replicate the cake that was a lie.
Oh, there you go. Also, I'm placing in chat a link to a survey. I'll include it in the email that I'm going to send out to everybody. I'll email everybody by tomorrow, a link that'll take you to the archive, the session slides, so you can go back and revisit those, and the handout. But we would love to know, outside of people saying it was great in chat, what you thought of today's session. And all feedback is anonymous, but we really appreciate any feedback that you can give.
And thank you. And just with that handout that is attached, that is a sort of just a general outline of this presentation. And the last page is a list of all of the games that my club has played and the themes that are associated with them, as well as a list of recommended reading of nonfiction books that are about video game design. So they range from what I talked about, the very first one, Composition of Video Games, is really sort of details what audiovisual ludonarrativity is and what constitutes a game, all the way to a book called Grand Theft Childhood, which is about the sort of learning and literacy benefits of video games for children. It's kind of a misnomer. It's explaining why you should not be afraid of children playing video games. Excellent,
thank you. And thank you for that handout. I am not seeing any questions coming through chat. So I think with that, I will, oh, somebody said this is pretty awesome, and thank you for being a resource as they've been trying to get their video game started in Leadville. So.
Of course. My email is on this presentation. Please reach out.
Excellent. Well, once again, I want to thank our attendees, and I want to thank Shane for sharing all of this information. Like I said, I'm kind of overwhelmed with all of the things that I've learned during the session, and the program sounds fantastic. So I will wish everybody a great afternoon. Everybody take care. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.